Welcome back, everyone. Shane Combs alongside Matt Combs. This is Expanding the Zone, show 76. And, Matt, we want to give a shout out to Dr. Chris Good for all the support here on the YouTube channel. And again, if you're on the YouTube side watching us, thank you. Check us out over on the podcast app as well, just about anywhere you can get your podcast there. Look for us expanding the zone so you can take us with us as you exercise or drive to and from work, however you might listen. But again, give us a good rating there and subscribe so you make sure you get us each and every show that comes out. And Matt, I think we're onto a pretty good topic here this week. We're coming up on the major league baseball trade deadline, and you hear all the terms buy or sell. Are you all in? Are you afraid to go all in and sacrifice a little bit of your prospects or some things that could hurt your organization moving forward? Or maybe we're not really good enough to win this year. Do we want to do that and risk not being as good in the future? And it kind of got me thinking about the term urgent versus a phrase that we commonly hear really in sports, but really in leadership in general: trust the process. So, if I was going to title the show tonight, I don't know if it's urgent versus process, or if it's now or later. I'll kind of let you play around with that a little bit. But as I welcome you to the show, just give me an opening thought on what comes to your mind when you balance this in your everyday leadership, or uh, as a coach, or as a principal, or however you want to go about it, from the debate of urgent, got to have it right now, versus got to put a long term in play, build a foundation so that I feel secure moving forward.
Yeah, Shane, when you hit me with this topic, when we were sitting there watching the MLB, trade deadline action or whatever, it was intriguing to me because I think it is I think it's a tough balance. I think as we get into this, um, it wouldn't surprise me if we get caught in the middle at times, quite honestly, because I do think it's a little bit of a tough balance of trying to be successful right now, um, trying to if it's a sports thing, trying to win. If it's a professional thing, just trying to be the best you can be or successful in your line of work or whatever, or running a business or whatnot, versus long-term stability, right? And being able to maintain and succeed, um, down the road, or maybe even, um, forfeiting a little success right now for bigger success later in some cases, right? I think we'll get into all this, but when you first hit me with this, I kind of thought, well, I think I kind of know how I feel about this. But then the more I thought about it, just in prep for this show, I don't know. I think at times maybe I'm a little more in the middle ground on this, but should be an interesting topic. I think there's a lot of different ways we can go with it for sure. Definitely in the sports world, this is a huge thing all the time, but I think it filters over into other areas too.
Matt, during the summer, when we're off work and we have more chance to have the TV on in the morning and so forth on the MLB Network, one of my favorite shows has Mark DeRosa on there in the MLB Central there, and it's a lot of our listeners may not even know who Mark DeRosa is. He was a solid baseball player. I'm guessing he played over a decade, maybe even 15 years or so for multiple teams. And I always think of him as a Brave. I think he might have even been on one of the Giants World Series teams, but he even managed our World Baseball Classic team here recently. So again, a lot of sports fans will at least know of him. But nonetheless, he got to talking one day about his time with the Braves. And if you remember, there for the longest time in our teenage years, the Braves went on about a 15, 20-year run where they were the standard. It didn't always result in World Series, but in terms of regular season division winners, I mean, is that a fair statement? They
Oh,
kind of set the standard.
yeah, I can't remember. Didn't they win the division like a decade or something in a row or something crazy? I can't
Right.
remember what it was now. Yeah.
Well, and he was talking about there was such an expectation to where you were going to win every day. And when you didn't win, it was almost a shocking thing. And if you started to lose two in a row or whatever, three in a row, there was almost like a problem. Like it was a it was something that just was unacceptable, and it became such a culture. And I think of that expectation of gotta have it every night, because like in the MLB they play 162 games or whatever. You might hear someone say, "Well, it's only April, it's only May, it's only one game. That's just a 3 game series in July." And after a while, you use that phrase enough, well, those all add up, and then all of a sudden you get to this point in the year, and say like our favorite team has been anywhere from 1 to 4 games out, and boy, would a handful of games mean a whole lot, right? And I think it's that culture piece of that expectation that's on the urgency side. The question I have for you is, I think we understand that. On the process side, we're looking at a foundation that moves forward. The question I have for you is, what would you say to people who say trust the process is sometimes an excuse for failure or an excuse for losing? So it's kind of that anti Atlanta Braves that Mark DeRosa was talking about on the air the other day, of urgent, got to have it right now, no ifs, ands, or buts, got to win, got to win, got to win, versus a process where you might say trust the process can sometimes become an excuse to fail, or it's an excuse not to win today.
Well, I 100% think it is in a lot of cases, Shane, because I think the best teams, you just mentioned like the Atlanta Braves as an example, but the best teams, have a sense of urgency and trust the process. Don't you think you can do both? This is where I was saying earlier, I kind of get caught a little bit in the middle of it because, like those teams you talked about, like say the Atlanta Braves or the Chicago Bulls when we were younger, right? And
Sure.
a lot of people watched The Last Dance, that was the series that was on ESPN. It's been on Netflix, about those '90s Bulls teams. And if you compare these great teams, um, one of the things I feel like they certainly had a process that they followed along with that sense of urgency. They Because I think you're right, Shane. I think at times it's very easy to say, well, trust the process. We're going to get there. If you're a major league team or a professional team, we're rebuilding. Stay patient, fans. We've got a plan. You know, because if you got a plan, then you have an excuse to tell your fans to sit through some losing seasons because we're on our way or whatever, right? But I think the best teams do both. I've always I've always admired people, I think, and teams that really have that must win mentality. Like you'll hear people say, was that a must win? Well, I don't know if it was a must win. I mean, isn't every game a must? I mean, like when did we get to a point where every game's not a must win? I mean, like I'm not saying like if your definition of must win is if we lose, we just cancel the season. Okay, well then it's not a must win, right? But if must win just means, hey, I have a sense of urgency and I think it's really, really important to win. I can remember as a Reds fan, Bronson Arroyo. I'll never forget this comment. And I was a big Bronson Arroyo fan. I think he was really good for the Reds. But one of the comments that really bothered me when he first got there was they were doing an interview with him, and they said, "What's different between the Boston Red Sox and the Cincinnati Reds? You came from Boston to here." He's like, well, it's a little more laid back. He goes, there was so much pressure to win every day there in Boston. And I come here to Cincinnati and it's not quite like that. Well, that comment kind of offended me, right? Like, why isn't there pressure to win every day? I know what he's saying. I mean, I know what he's getting at. The media is not as hard on you, right? There's not, but not having that expectation, Shane, you know, don't you think that's a little bit dangerous not to have the expectation and not to have that urgency? I mean, because yeah, the process is important, and there are times where maybe a team's not ready to have that ultimate success yet. I get that, but before we get into like the process side of it, I guess what I'm asking you is, do you think you have to sacrifice one for the other all the time?
I don't think you do. I'd like, from the process side, I like there being foundations, like in leadership, in coaching or as a principal. I like the concept of having non-negotiables. I like the
Mhm.
idea of day in, day out. These are things I want to stand on. These are things I want to do well. But my fear is when it becomes an excuse. I spent 30 years, and most people, now have known I've stepped away from coaching baseball, but I was a baseball coach for 30 years. Most, just about all, but maybe a handful of those years at one of the smaller schools in the area, and kind of like a small market team would think in major league, like a small enrollment school. I always I always feared that we would use that as an excuse.
Mhm.
Okay. So, like, if I step away from it and just talk sports, I understand over the last 20 years some of the disadvantages of coaching at a small school, or at a school that maybe is giving up 50, 70, 100 kids against the opponent you're playing against. Okay.
Right.
But at the end of the day, you're playing against them. And like you said, there's an urgency to beat them, and there's an urgency for them to beat you. And you can't allow that to be an excuse. I guess that's kind of what I go back to. Though you were talking about how the programs and these organizations that win, the Chicago Bulls, they didn't have to win 70 games that one year. 64 would have probably been good enough to do what they did, right? But
Right.
they won because, well, they were playing, they might as well win. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? There's no load management. There was none of that. You know what I mean? There's no load management so that we can rest up for the playoffs. Not like we have 3 games this week. We want to win all three of them. And
Right.
it's just that's the way that's the way people were wired a little bit more back in that time. I do think some of that's changed a little bit. I'll take you to the other side of it a little bit. The tanking, we call it, right? We're
Mhm.
gonna we don't want to win. We talked about the NFL. They always talk about these schedules and these teams that are bad. Well, they're not that bad. What happens is the last 6 weeks of the year, I question if they're trying to win. I'm not saying the coaches and the players are out there losing on purpose. I'm saying, but are they putting their best foot forward in the front office, or in terms of who they're playing, or the personnel decisions, or those types of things? You see what I'm saying? Like,
Yes.
it's it's a situation where I think the process can be appreciated in terms of those non-negotiables and the thing you're going. But I think the urgency still has to come from the result that's right out in front of you. I know in an upcoming show that you've tried to set up something on the mental side of it, right? I think it becomes a mental edge, and we'll talk about this hopefully on future expanding the zones. And if you want to touch on that here, you can. But like, it's a situation where it does become a culture piece of you have to have an urgency to want to be successful every single time you compete, or I don't think it can be some switch that you just flip on and off.
Yeah, yeah. Little teaser alert there, Shane, on the mental side coming up. We haven't had a lot of guests on the show. We're trying to line up a guest. We'll keep it secret right now, but we're trying to get a guest on one of our upcoming shows, and we are going to talk the mental side of the game a little bit, mental side of sports. But no, I think with what you're saying, you had mentioned the word you had mentioned the term non-negotiable.
Hmm.
Um, that's interesting to me because I think sometimes too, in all fairness to the process side of this thing and the part where you're building for the future a little bit, I do think there has to be probably some non-negotiables in your culture that at times may seem like they're not even lending themselves to immediate success, right? Because there may be some times you make some difficult decisions with player personnel, or yeah, you may feel like you have to stay the course. Um, let me just throw a question at you, Shane. Okay, let's just look at this from like let's just take let's take basketball. Okay, let's just use that example right now. Let's say you're coaching a high school basketball team. Let's say you take over a program, right? And the program has been down, and it's not in a place right at that moment where you're going to be a championship level, contender. Um, how do you balance that? Like, do you go in? Is it in your opinion, is the right approach to say, okay, um, I want to develop certain standards of how we're going to defend. Obviously you're going to try to develop your culture. I'm talking more X's and O's here a little bit, okay? But like, hey, do I want to teach a certain style of defense and be fundamentally sound here, 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 and here? Do I want to be a team offensively that's, I think long term we need to be patient. We need to work the offense. We need to be a team that doesn't turn it over. Um, do I implement that right now, knowing that maybe it doesn't fit this particular team very well, but since this particular team's not really ready to win at a high level, do I just go ahead and go with that and try to like establish that for the future? Or is the better way to build a program to try to win a few and get maybe a little more energy and excitement around it? So now maybe I sacrifice a little bit of that future fundamental stuff for pulling a rabbit out of my hat occasionally, putting in some, maybe a junk defense here and there to just try to win a particular game. Am I making sense on that a little bit?
It makes total sense. Yeah.
What to you? I've been in this situation, as a coach twice in my career, quite honestly, where I started coaching at a place that the program was quote unquote down a little bit, but um, I want to know your opinion on that. How do you approach something like that?
It really is tough because what you're saying, I've been there as a young head coach before, where you game plan to death and you throw this defense there and you're outmanned and you try to compete and you go out and you compete for three and a half quarters and then you end up falling short a little bit and you feel like you not only lost your urgency goal, right? Because you
Mhm.
lost the game, but then you look back 10 games into the year, 15 games into the year, and you feel like you've lost your trust the process goal as well because you don't feel like you're creating an identity or culture. So I do think there's an age and a stage component to this that you do have to be aware of in leadership. I guess there's 2 points that I would throw back to you to kind of comment on that. I think sometimes in decision making, we run in the quick fix here on expanding the zone. I talked about the microwave versus crock pot before, right? The microwave that got to have it right now, where the crock pot's a little bit more of a simmer, let it cook all day long.
Well,
And I guess one of my pet peeves in leadership sometimes is, and maybe this comes down to the results. We just did a thing on sophomore slump where we talked about the importance of expectation, right? And how expectation sometimes can determine how we feel about the result. Well, a lot of times in decision making, let's say we have a problem. Let's say our data shows that we have, 50% success rate, and that's just not good enough. And we incorporate something in our business, and in that particular thing we're charting, all of a sudden now we're 80%. Well, we're not 100% perfect, right? But I think you could argue that from 50% to 80%, whatever we did was pretty good. Where a lot of people would still look and say, well, we're still missing that 20%. Do you see what I'm saying? So
mhm.
I do think you have to have, no matter how competitive you are and urgent you are in that moment, you still have to be able to have a process or an evaluation process, maybe would be the better phrase, to determine if you're good. I think what happens sometimes, another pet peeve, let me use a teaching example. I'll hear a lot of teachers that, they might have 25 standards they have to teach before April for the state test. Well, and they'll get to February and be like, I'm not quite, the kids just aren't quite getting that. I just don't know if I'm going to get to all 25 before the test. I'm thinking, like, well, what do you mean you're not going to get to all 25? You know what I'm saying? Like, yeah, the
Yeah.
test is going to happen in April. It's kind of like a business deadline, right? Matt, I remember, not to get too windy here, I remember when I first got into media, I had a big English language arts background. I loved writing. And I'd go and I'd watch the game. I'd come home and write my article. And I would have so much trouble early on meeting my deadline. Back then in the newspaper, right? It had to be in by like midnight or whatever. And they didn't care how good my article was by 2. They needed it
Yeah.
at midnight. You see what I'm saying? And I
Right.
really, really struggled with that because I felt like I could really write a great article, but my perfection in that, I didn't have enough urgency to understand. No, no, no. It didn't matter how good it was at 2 o'clock when I read it back to myself. It mattered how good it was at midnight and what was submitted at that point. You see what I'm saying? So
Mhm.
like, I guess there's a back and forth between urgency and process that has to exist in order for you to be competitive in the moment, but to continue to give yourself the best chance to be more successful in the competition to come. Does you follow me there?
Mhm. Yeah, I do. And one of the things I always struggled with, Shayne, with this is, you know, how do you, if you're coaching a team, let's take high school, whatever, any sport, how do you look your seniors in the eye? Okay. If you're constantly talking about the future, you understand what I mean? I think that's dangerous too. Cause I always felt like it was really disrespectful to my senior groups that I had on teams that like I coached at one school for 22 years. Okay. So obviously we had ups and we had down, there was not every year was a championship level team. We were fortunate to have good teams, but not every team was like a championship level team. So, I had teams where I had maybe two or three sophomores getting quite a bit of playing time, and you didn't have to squint real hard to see that, man, this group's going to be pretty good here in a couple of years. We may have something kind of special here. But to talk about that in that moment in that locker room, I always kind of felt like it was sort of disrespecting my current senior group because they didn't have next year or the year after that. So I always felt my sense of urgency sometimes, Shayne, was driven by the kids that I was around. You have a relationship with these kids, you care about them, you want to see them have success, right? But then at the same time, and you know, we see professional sports all the time. There's probably some of that too, but they're professionals. So it's sort of like they understand the business. And even if it bothers them a little bit, you know what I mean? If you're playing for the Colorado Rockies right now and the team's selling off some of their guys, you may not be super happy about it, but since you've got like 25 wins, you're thinking, well, we understand the process. High school kids don't always understand that process, and they don't always have next year. Um, so for me, that was always um, a little mental tug of war, I guess, of how do I keep my eye on that future while at the same time doing what's right for this current group of people that are in it for the last time. And that's where I go back to in my opening statement when I said the more I thought about this, the more I found myself on the fence a little bit.
I think where urgency can't be debated is you have to be prepared to compete. You have to be prepared to go, right? It's kind of like if the tornado warning comes, you don't have time to be like, "Whoa, no, no, hold on. Let me review that again. Where are we supposed to go? What are we supposed
Right.
to?" You know what I'm saying? It's got to be an urgency to execute a plan at the very best of your ability with the resources you have at that point, no matter where you might be. Maybe you're at home, maybe you're stuck in your car, maybe you're at work, maybe you see what I'm saying? It's not like hey, hold on just a second there, hold up that tornado. Let me make sure I've got all my things. It
Yeah.
doesn't work that way, right? There's an
Right.
urgency. Now, obviously, that's a far bigger example, a life or death type of thing. But in the leadership culture, there's some truth to that. It's kind of like the testing deadline, or if your boss says, "I need this by Tuesday," it can't be, "Oh, I didn't quite get to that. I'll have it to you by Thursday." You see what I'm saying? Like
Mhm.
that. No, they needed it on Tuesday. They're going to need what you had. So I think what happens sometimes is it still goes back to the result of what it is you're producing. When we hear trust the process at Alabama with Nick Saban, we think genius, right? We
Yeah.
hear trust the process with the 76ers where they had some injuries and it just didn't play out and their best player couldn't stay healthy. That almost gets made fun of. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? It was the
Yeah.
I would like to think it had some of the same ideas or concepts, but one place was just was able to recruit and recruit and recruit and recruit and have the best talent and the best coaches and so forth. Where the other place just it didn't quite work out. So am I wrong there? At the end of the day, you're still going to be judged by the outcome. And it does go back to that sophomore slump show of the expectations kind of tell us what the results might be. You know what I mean? Like, you expected Alabama to play for a national championship every year under Nick Saban, or hey, what's wrong with Alabama, right?
Right.
Whereas I don't know if people ever totally were shocked that the 76ers didn't make the process work.
Well, and don't you think too, Shayne, that sometimes depending on where a leader, a coach, or a leader in whatever field, don't you think sometimes it kind of depends on where they're at in their career and in their development in terms of how much patience you can even have, right? Because like, Nick Saban was in a situation by the time he was at Alabama, to use that example, was if Alabama would have had a down year, yeah, people would have been upset. People would have thrown a fit. Like, I can't believe, but they probably wouldn't have been calling for his job on one
Uh,
bad season, right?
right.
Whereas if you get somebody who's young in their career, just starting out, maybe they don't get that leeway, right? They don't get that extra leash. So don't you think even at the high school level, like I've always kind of, because I think it's one thing to sit here as a veteran coach and say, well, you should do this, this, and this. But don't you think sometimes a first or second year coach maybe feels a different level of pressure to try to create some sort of positive result? You know what I mean? Even if you're quote unquote mortgaging the future a little bit, you're trying to show people, hey, I know what I'm doing. We were able to win, you know, my first year as football coach, hey, we went 4-6, last year they only went 2-8. We improved, you know what I mean? That type of thing. You feel a little pressure to do that, don't you think?
I do, and I would even go like staying with your example there. As Saban moved on from Alabama and moved into media, the guy that had come from Washington there, his name escapes me, DeBoer
Uh-huh.
from Washington. That's the Alabama football coach now, right? Kalen DeBoer. Um, I even heard something the other day. It was talking about like, got a little bit of pressure on him. You can't really go that second year now and not make the playoff. You see what I'm saying? So like
Yeah.
it's already that so you can trust the process and build a program all you want. There better be an urgency to produce a little bit, or like you said, there may not be time to see the process through. I guess another thing I would throw at you, Matt, is sometimes urgency. Maybe it's not realistic to win today, depending on your talent level or who you're playing or what you're up against. Or like I said, maybe in the one example I said earlier, it's not realistic to have 100% efficiency, but man, you improve by 25-30%. You should feel good about that. I think there's some of that, but I think that's the urgency is is if it's not to actually win, it's an urgency just to constantly get better. It's an urgency to compete and care and be genuine in your approach. I I hear these veterans all the time talk about it's a game of adjustments, and you'll hear these broadcasters and they'll talk about maybe they've played for so long in the NBA or Major League Baseball. We always use Reds examples on here. Think of like Sam LaCure and Chris Welch and Barry Larkin and Jeff Brantley. All those guys were really good players, right? I mean, Barry Larkin was a Hall of Famer. um, they talk about game of adjustments, and they're talking about how Andrew Abbott, he's come up through, and early on he kind of had some stuff that wasn't overpowering, but it's kind of intriguing to the hitter, and you get a lot of chase, and they go people start to make an adjustment to him. I got thinking about that as I was watching him pitch here recently. Guys are taking more pitches against him. And as a result, he's walking more people, right? Well, now it's the adjustment. You have success, I adjust to you. Now I'm starting to have some success, you adjust to me. And I think what you're going to see is you'll see Andrew Abbott, who has a mixture of a lot of different pitches, start to attack the zone a little bit earlier in the count. I mean, I think there's that back and forth, you know, chess match, and I guess that's what I would say to you, and I'd love for you to comment on that. Sometimes urgency isn't just okay, I won or lost today.
Mhm.
It's just there's an urgency that I have to be better, right? I okay, if I lost today, I have to be better. I can't continue to just do the same thing over and over and over and over. I have to take strides forward. And I think people in leadership and people in competition, people on teams, people in terms of coworkers, they appreciate a willingness for someone to care, look themselves in the mirror and get better at something. Do you think that kind of, because sometimes we think of that as the process. Sometimes I think that's as much urgency as anything.
No, I agree. And I think that you know, not to keep talking so much baseball, but the idea for this show, as we said, came from this MLB trade deadline, right? We were
Right.
talking, somebody had said the other day, why does it always have to be an all or a nothing? Like, hey, we're buyers, we're sellers, right? Because if you're a seller, then it's like we're giving up on it right now, we're building for the future, right? If you're buyers, it's like, well, we're going all in right now, trying to. I think some of the best moves sometimes at the trade deadlines and the ones that don't get a lot of attention are the ones where a team maybe is buying for the future and not right now because maybe they get a player that's under control for a while. Do you remember back? I think it was 2009, Shayne, where the Reds weren't necessarily in a playoff race and they got Scotty Rowland.
Oh yeah.
I believe the trade deadline, and it wasn't so much for that year. But the next year, the Reds won the division. They got Scotty Rowland knowing they were going to have him under club control. My point to the baseball example is this: it's what you're saying. Sometimes you don't have to have ultimate success right now if it's obvious that you're taking strides toward it, right? And you are getting better one way or the other. Um, like if you're to my example of taking over a high school sports program that's maybe been down a little bit. Maybe you don't win a ton of games that first year, but maybe when fans come to the game, they just see something different. You know, they're like, man, I know we didn't win a ton of games, but it looks a little different this year. Kids maybe are playing a little bit harder. Kids are diving on for a loose ball. I've always said to our guys, if somebody was at a game that didn't really know much about basketball, right? Maybe just somebody's there, some family member doesn't really know much about basketball. Could even they tell that we're a little bit different? Does that make sense? Could even they see, like, yeah, I don't really know what's going on out there, but man, that team looks a little different to me. They look like they're doing things a little bit differently, a little bit better. So I think that's kind of what you're saying, right? That's part of the process there, and the result may not always be there, but the growth is there. If the players know that, hey, we are getting better, um, there is an improvement here. Um, but again, we live in a society that's so tied to results, right? That sometimes that's difficult. But I think you're spot on there. I think that part of that part of that development, um, even the urgency of success now doesn't always mean success on the scoreboard. You hope it does, but it could just be that constant improvement that you're seeing.
Matt, in all your years of coaching, this would be a really interesting question. I'm sure you can look back now as you step away from the competition and you look back and you can probably pick out some games where, oh wow, we just probably weren't good enough to win that game. But I guarantee you, in that moment when you went in, you had almost convinced yourself. Because goodness, I remember the very first varsity basketball game I coached in my career as a head coach was against OJ Mayo.
I remember this.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but like looking back on that now, like we actually played a pretty good first half, but like looking back on that now, over the course of 4 quarters, we probably weren't beating OJ Mayo. Okay.
Right.
But like in that moment, I truly believed that well, if we'd have rotated properly right there, we could have contested that shot and kept him off the offense. Like
Right.
that's just the way you're wired in that moment. Like talk to me a little bit about that because like when you step away from it, maybe it's good and bad. Sometimes maybe it gives you a clear mind to have a more realistic point of view versus a competitive point of view of where no, I'm going all in trying to win, 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 right? So talk to me about that mindset between I've got to be successful now compared to man, that probably wasn't the most realistic thing looking back on that. Do you understand what I'm
Yeah.
asking?
Yeah. I think, I've been in those situations and some of those situations fell in tournament play where you're sort of all in anyway, right? Because it's now or never, it's do or die. But I've been in those games. twice in my career, the teams that I've had that made it to the regionals got beat by the eventual state champion. So, you look back and you think, man, we put together a game plan and we really felt in our hearts that we could, get it done. And then we got beat by 30 points. What happened, right? Well, what happened was, this team won the state championship. They were better than us, but the competitive part of you, you know, you, you put together a game plan, you think you can win. But it goes back to leading, to me at least, coaching or leading the way you want to be led or the way you wanted to be coached. I
Hmm.
would not have wanted to play for a coach who didn't believe that we had a chance to win. You know what I'm
Right.
saying?
Right.
And didn't at least try to put a game plan together to give us a chance to win. Now, sometimes after the fact, reality hits you and you realize that, man, we could have played that team 20 times and not won, right? But in that moment, we convinced ourselves we had a chance. So, yeah, I mean, to me, I don't know, man. If you didn't put yourself in that situation, Shayne, should you even coach? Really? I'm just being real. You know what I mean? Like you at least should put yourself in that mindset, even if it's a pipe dream. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well,
Because
and,
it's
and
your
I
job to
guess,
do that.
yeah, and I mean, I understand there's going to be another side of that argument of being realistic and trying to be honest and trying to do all the.
Yeah.
I get that, but I guess it goes back to, and tell me if I'm disconnected here. I think it goes back to performing at your highest level on the most consistent basis. The sports analogy I would use is there's so many teams that play up and down to the level of their competition. It's a very frustrating thing, right? You'll
Mhm.
see them play and they'll play against some of the elite competition and maybe they'll come up just a little bit short. And then the next thing you know, they're playing teams that are much, of a lesser talent than them, and there they go playing all the way down to there, and they're in a dogfight there too, and they just spend the whole year in dogfights. You see what I'm saying? There's
Right.
no level of consistency of them competing at that level, and I think a little bit of that has to be the urgency on how you approach every drill. I see it. I see it in the teaching profession sometimes, right? Some of the most talented teachers I've ever seen, man, they can knock your socks off with some different lessons, but then you'll see them kind of put it in cruise control at different parts of the year, right? Where some of my favorite teachers that I've worked with over the years, man, they truly bring it every single day, right? Right? Even
Mhm.
when they're not feeling their best or whatever, you can tell that there's a genuine care to have a great lesson that day. You know what I mean? It's
Right.
so I see it not only in a sports situation, I see it in terms of how people go about their everyday life. And I guess that's what comes to my mind as you're explaining that is no matter how you feel, there has to be a sense of urgency to perform at your best, whatever that may be, right? In terms
Mhm.
of, I think that's what we're saying, isn't it?
Yeah.
Can't we tie urgency to competitiveness and that's it? I mean,
Yeah. I want to clarify because when I made my last comment, you had said there'd be an argument for realism and honesty and all that. I want to make sure folks understand what I'm saying. I think as a leader, as a coach, you should always be honest with your folks. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think there's anything wrong as a coach of looking at your team and saying, guys, listen, this is tough. We're in for a tough one here. These guys are really good that we're playing. It's not going to be easy. Are we an underdog? Yeah. It's pretty obvious we're an underdog, but here's what we can do to try to win. Does that make sense?
oh yeah,
We're still going to put together a game plan and we're still going to believe we can try to do A, B, and C. You don't look at them and say, "Oh, these guys suck." You guys, to try to give them false confidence because then your team never believes you. You know what I mean? Um, I've never believed the other way either. I've never believed in the Lou Holtz approach of telling your team, man, these guys are unbelievable, that you're getting ready to play when you know they're not. Because then you're setting that tone where your team will think, that's just coach talking. You know what I mean? I've always believed in more, Shayne, of that honesty. I guess what I was saying earlier was still have a plan to try to do it. You know what I
yeah.
mean? Yeah, it's going to be tough, but still have a plan to try to do it. So yeah, so I guess for me, and what did you say right before that? I'm sorry. The question you just.
I was saying the more I go through this, and this is what's cool about our show, is I always feel like this show serves as much professional development as us as I hope it does everybody else. I feel like urgency can best be defined by just being the most complete competitive version of yourself. You know what I
Oh
mean?
yes, yes,
Performing
yes, yes.
performing to your level in one that doesn't mean you don't have process and you don't have big picture and you don't have non-negotiables or whatever, but in that moment, I want to conduct the most incredible practice as a coach I ever have. I want to have the most incredible lesson as a teacher, right? The most incredible game plan. Or daggone it, we're playing the night I want to win.
Mhm.
You know, that type of thing. I think the competitiveness and that consistency of competitiveness probably best defines urgency. I guess that's what I was throwing at you. Would you agree with that?
Oh yeah, 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 yeah. Definitely. That you know, the consistency thing to me is, I think to me, has always sort of been the ultimate measuring stick of, I don't know, of greatness, for lack of a better way to say it. I mean, because to me, consistency over a period of time has always been the most impressive thing. I guess when you're building a program or any kind of organization, don't you feel like anybody can be good, you know, once in a while, right? Or have that one great team. To me, I've always been impressed with that consistency, day after day after day, year after year after year. When I was at Benton County, we had a sign in our locker room that said, it's easy to be great occasionally. What's hard is to be great every day. And to really preach that, are we going to show up, like you say, to practice today and just have a great practice, right? Because maybe if we are having a great practice, maybe part of our league's not having a great practice today. And then if we have a great practice tomorrow, maybe we gain on everybody else. It's that consistency of just showing up and doing it right at your standard and at your level. And then, hope that's enough. I mean, the thing about sports, for instance, is, there's a winner and there's a loser. There's times where you might do it well, you might do it to the best of your ability, and it might not be good enough, right? But I do agree with you, Shane. I think ultimately what we're talking about tonight, if you're really wanting to combine that urgency with the process, is like you're saying, just live up to your own standard.
There's one last thing in my notes here. I thought this was outstanding. I don't know, Matt. I don't know if you had a chance to see it, or our listeners if they had a chance to see it. If not, I would go back and Google it up there and listen to Scotty Scheffler's um, press conference leading up to the British Open. It was kind of something that caught a lot of attention and went a little bit viral, and it went into a lot of different, sports outlets, but also some business outlets and so forth. It was really, really good. He was talking about how here are these golf tournaments, and he wakes up every day and he can't believe how much they just own his mind and how much he wants to win them and win them and win them. But then after he wins them, he realizes, well, that was kind of cool, and then it's kind of over, and it's not all that fulfilling in terms of who he wants to be. You see what I'm saying? He's
Mhm.
like, for don't get me wrong, he says, I love the fact I get to play golfer and make an incredible living, and he's like, man, for whatever reason, these tournaments, man, I really really want to win them. Sometimes so bad, I'm a little bit shocked that I want to win them that bad. But he said, when it's over and said and done, he's like, I would be far more miserable if I felt it being a husband or a father or some of those
Mhm.
different things. And he had just incredible perspective. You never listened to it one time and ever thought, hey, this guy's not competitive or this guy doesn't want to win golf tournament. You know what I mean? Like you never once
Right.
got that. You just, he had a great understanding. And it got me thinking on this show topic of I would stress this about process to leaders. In all my years of coaching, I can relate a little bit to the message he's giving there from the standpoint of I don't know how much I took time to enjoy success sometimes. If I look back on it, a little bit more, I think I probably wish I would have allowed myself to just embrace that a little bit and enjoy that a little bit. Sometimes when I'd experienced success, it was almost more of a relief.
Mhm.
if that makes sense. And I think that's a dangerous place to get. I think that's something that you have to really, really look for. If you enjoy the process, I think this is where the process comes in. If you allow yourself to enjoy the process, I think what you'll enjoy is the people that you accomplish it with. I have a saying that I always give to kids, you know, being a part of something bigger than yourself is one of the coolest things you'll ever be a part of, right? Like winning a championship with your buddies, or with a group of people, coaching staff or whatever, or having an incredible accomplishment in our middle school or in your high school or whatever as a staff. That's a really cool thing, right? If you have a group of people that are connected and care about one another. I think that's where the process comes from, is allow yourself, even in your most urgent moments or your most competitive moments. I I think that's where the process comes through, is in terms of that journey that you go on and the people that you do it with. So I just wanted to throw that out there, Matt. I don't even know that there's a question as much as I wanted to throw that out there and kind of get your sense of a response to that. And I don't even know if you saw the Scheffler press conference, but it was really well said. But basically, what he was talking about was, be more than just that urgent result that we're talking about on this show. I think that's the part of the process that makes the most sense to me. Talk to us a little bit about that journey and the people that you're connected with when you go through those. Because I know you've had plenty of those as a coach. Obviously, you had one of the most incredible experiences as a high school athlete.
Yeah, it's funny. Over the last month or so, I've had the opportunity to play golf with a couple of my former players from Benton County, and guys that I don't see very often. I play quite a bit of golf with NJ Kite, who's a good friend of mine, who's the coach of Benton County now, and he was my assistant at Benton County. So we're all the time talking about those teams that we had. Remember this happened. Remember this story. You look back on them, and some of the stories are funny, and some of the stories are cool. And can you believe this happened? You remember this game? Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's fun to talk about those things. But when I played golf with these guys, two separate occasions, two separate guys, inevitably stories started coming up. You know what I mean? And a lot of them was like crazy things I would say or do right back then, and they get a kick out of that. And some of that stuff, I'm like, yeah, man, I kind of maybe shouldn't have been that way. But like, but they enjoy those stories and they're funny or whatever. But it reminds you that what was really cool about the whole thing was both of these guys were on some of our best teams that we had there, right? So looking back, what's really cool about it is like you said, doing it together, right? Enjoying it as a group. But when it was happening, I didn't take the time to enjoy it. You know what I'm saying? Because unfortunately for me, and I've said this before, I think people are sort of motivated by the thrill of victory or the fear of failure. And for me, it's always been the fear of failure. So fear of failure has always been my motivation. And I'm not necessarily proud of that. I don't think it's the most healthy way, but it's just who I am. So, but when you're driven by not wanting to fail, it's like you say, when you win, it's a relief, right? That's what it is. And you really don't take the time to enjoy it. Sometimes it's not that fulfilling right then in that second, in that moment. Now it is fulfilling later on when you have a chance to look back, um, when you have that reunion years later with the team, right? And you get together and you're talking about the old days. But in that moment, you're so caught up in doing it. Um, that you don't get to enjoy it. My guess is if Scotty Scheffler 10 years from now has won 10 or 11 majors and he gets out of the game and it gets put in the Hall of Fame, he'll reflect and enjoy it even more. Does that make sense?
Hmm.
than what he gets to enjoy it right now. Because I do think if you're a competitor, you're so caught up. It's almost kind of like what's next. There's always that mentality of like, we
Right.
accomplished this, but I don't have time to rest on that. We have to get on to the next thing. Um, I don't know. I'm not even sure that's completely healthy, depending on how obsessed you get with that. But I do think there's successful people are sort of driven to get to the next thing.
Yeah, it's kind of that like-minded thing. I think that's why I think that's why when you come across those special groups, that's what makes them special is you become like-minded. Remember, we did the show on make the most important thing, whatever that is, being winning or being successful at this or successful at that or whatever, or just or going about and accomplishing something together. I think that like-minded approach is what makes that. It's really good stuff. I guess my notebook's clear, so I won't cut you off as we go here, but I'll kind of get us started going on final thoughts. A lot of times in these shows, I know where I'm going to go with final thoughts. Tonight, I've been trying to take some notes because I'm going to be honest. As I went through this here, there's been a lot of things in my career that I've been a process driven person, and I've understood big picture. I always have. I feel like that's been a strength of mine, but I'm very very competitive, and you try, not always successfully, but you're trying to win each and every game or each and everything that you're a part of. And I guess as I come to the final thought, if I sort out my notes here that I've been taking from some of my things I've said and then some of your responses, I think, like so many of our shows, when the two things come together, Matt, I think that's when you find your biggest success, right? I think there has to be a process to what you're going. I mean, unless you're signing up and you're going to do something for like 2 months and then you're never going to do it again or whatever, I think you owe it to yourself. I think you owe it to all the people you're leading. You're owing it to the entire organization or program or whatever it is you're leading to have process in mind, right? You have to have those non-negotiables. You have to have those foundation pieces. You have to have a vision of where do I want to be in 6 months? Where do I want to be in a year? Where do I want to be in 2 years? I think you owe that to the people you're leading. But I think you have to be careful not to allow it to become a built-in excuse of, well, we're just not quite good enough to do that right now. We're just not quite good enough. You can't let it get to that. So I think the urgency comes from not just winning, but I think what I've come to tonight on the show, and I think the show's really helped me in this, I think it's that relentless pursuit of competing at the highest level possible every single time you do it. And if you do that, it's kind of one of those cliche things. You kind of can live with the result, right? I mean, we've all been there before. You lose some of those games sometimes, and you're like, I can't stomach that. I can't. Where there's been other nights, as competitive as I am, we've lost games, and when I've been on the bus ride home or whatever, in my quietest time, I'll think to myself, man, that the kids had given every single thing they had tonight. I don't know what else they could have done. Man, like it. You follow me there a little bit. So,
Yeah.
like to me, it's that combination of foundation, process, and play, but approaching every single step of the way, every step of that process with an urgency to be your very best.
Yeah, I think that's pretty well said, Shane. And I think honestly, we're probably pretty close to the same page here in our final thoughts. I mean, for me, it as we did this show and we said at the beginning, the idea that spawned this was this Major League Baseball trade deadline, and how it seems so black and white. Are you a buyer or are you a seller, right? Are you giving up on the season and building for the future, or are you trying to win right now, right? There's no middle ground, even though there probably is, but that's kind of the way it's presented, right? For what I've discovered in kind of doing this show with you tonight is that I don't think it's that black and white. I think it's probably way more in the middle of, you can be somebody who's got the future in mind and you're building toward that while still trying to be successful right now. Um, and being able to admit, like you just said, that even in situations where you don't win on the scoreboard, maybe something was gained tonight, right? Like we got better tonight. Um, so I do think, I guess the thing I took away from the show is, I don't think you have to completely sacrifice one for the other.
Well, and I would go back to the utilizing, not just when I say being the best you can in that moment, I think that includes the resources you have. You know what I mean? Like in leadership, like can't we agree that the Cincinnati Reds general manager isn't working with the same resources that say the Yankees are, right? When it
Right.
comes to the major league trade deadline. So like the same can be true sometimes in your organization or program that you're leading. Maybe you don't have a particular financial ability in place, or maybe you have some finances to play, but you need a little bit of facility upgrade, or you need this or that. My point is recognizing what you have. Sure, there's excuses, you know there's always going to be excuses, but are you able to take the resources you have and then produce the best based on what you have there? So, well, Matt, it's a good show. Show 76. Thank you, Dr. Chris Good. I think I'm excited about some of the things we have. Em. I know you teased a little bit of us looking at the middle side of sports. Man, I think we have a good show topic probably somewhere before we finish up our season as we get closer to the fall, where we break down where everything's gone to the seven divisions in so many
Mhm.
sports, or even
Mhm.
even some fall sports. Because even some of the fall sports now, like cross country is going to four, track's going to in the spring going to go to five. Correct? There's some different.
Yeah, I think, man, I mean, this is all happening so fast. I got to be honest with you. Sometimes I lose track. I think soccer's maybe five divisions
Mm,
now. I think, yeah, track. If you remember when they expanded to seven, track and cross country didn't expand at first. Now they have. Um, so it's happening in every sport. And, there's this argument uh, of, well, does that water it down? Is that the right thing? Is that the wrong thing? Do we need this many divisions? Um, so it's an interesting dynamic. There was an article written, I think, in the Zanesville Times that kind of got you and I thinking
mhm.
about this a little bit. So yeah, we've sort of put that show. I think we've sort of put that on the back burner, wanting to do that maybe right before we get into the regular season here in a couple weeks. So yeah, we've got that one too. So I think we've got a couple good topics here um, as we round out this season, depending on how long season seven goes here, probably wrapping up sometime in the fall. But yeah, I think we've got a couple interesting topics for sure.
No question about it. And what I'll do is I'll put a couple of those out on social media leading up to the show, and then during the show week where it's posted, just to try to allow some feedback. Um, I've really enjoyed some of the back and forth social media things that could lead to future shows as well. So, on that note, I think we'll wrap it up. Again, show 76 in the books. Again, thank you to Dr. Chris Good for all the support. Yeah, give us a good rating there if you get a chance. Make sure you're subscribed over on the YouTube side as well as on your podcast app, so that you're making sure that you get expanding the zone each and every week. So, on that note, for Matt Holmes, I'm Shayne Holmes. Appreciate everybody being with us, and we'll see you next time on Expanding the Zone.